Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our discussion of Hegel's lectures on the philosophy of world history. I'm Ahilleas, and sitting opposite me in the digital world is Philip.
Hello there.
And today we're going to talk about the sections that are headed as the moral sphere, subjective freedom and their violation, and ethical customs. So very juicy, as we will find out.
Yes, in relation to ancient China, because right now where we are in the text is with regards to Hegel's chapter on ancient China.
Right, so if you missed our previous episode, or rather, no, 2 episodes ago, we began the Hegel's account of world history proper, and the first stage, the first moment of world history begins with ancient China, according to Hegel. And we've been working our way through some of the history, the basic features that Hegel wants to outline. So we spoke about the family and the way the way the family relates to itself, and about the emperor and how it's really just the state is really just the emperor, and whatever the emperor wants to do is whatever is in the state.
Indeed.
And
right then.
Yeah.
Or you want to add some more?
Well, no, just to say that we're going to talk a lot about, I think what we discussed last week is going to be really pertinent this week. It's a lot more sort of building up on the implications of what it means for the emperor to be what it means for the emperor's will to be the laws of the state.
Indeed, yeah.
So do you want to begin, Philip?
Sure. So what's kind of struck me here at the beginning was Hegel sort of outlines that law and morality are in immediate unity, and that in the event where custom rules, so the laws are in part insufficient, or else they base themselves on custom. So he seems to say that there's a tight identification between custom and laws, such that laws are tied together with tradition, and tradition is tied together with laws. So they're kind of woven together pretty tightly, as immediate unity, to put it in technical terms.
Yeah.
But this also means that there's going to be a lack of space or interiority, one could say, especially with regards to, as we're going to see, morality. Because with law and custom so tightly bound, morality also will be kind of be participating in this structure, but in such a way that there isn't anything, more like moral in Hegel's modern sense of morality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely the most striking feature of this section, I think. Hegel's reading of the state as being in this immediate unity and the consequences that follow therefrom.
Yeah, it makes sense in terms of the systematic logical progression that given this is the beginning of world history, well, we see things in their most primitive state. And it is much simpler to think of morality just completely identified with legality, right? And
I guess so.
Bind the two together immediately.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some kind of logical necessity for this. It's interesting that the first stage isn't this sort of anarchic state where morality just reigns free without laws, and it's all about the subjectivity of all the individual citizens, and that's what's sort of raging, that's what's binding. Or maybe that's the point, maybe that couldn't bind the state together. Morality would not be sufficient to bind the state together, because the interiority of each individual would constantly conflict with the interiority of every other individual, and maybe that's why it would never work.
But the issue is that in this framework where everything is kind of like top down and externally imposed, where there is little or no disregard for one's interiority, even in thought, like even thinking about it explicitly, that doesn't prevent interiority from coming out, right? And it doesn't prevent personal ambition. Is a lot of internal strife and civil wars and breakdown of the Chinese empire into splinter kingdoms, which then have added at each other, and then so one guy comes out top, that starts the other thing, starts a new dynasty, right?
Right. Yeah. Should we? So after Hegel has introduced this immediate unity, that the ancient Chinese state is immediate unity of the moral and the legal aspect. After he's introduced this, he then goes on to almost give us a summary of the distinction between the legal aspect and the moral aspect.
Yeah.
And thank God that he does, because I had forgotten the distinction. So it might be useful to just briefly go over that, maybe,
Sure,
for our listeners. So regarding the legal aspect, he writes, laws deal with what is right as the concrete existence of free volition, albeit not within itself, whereas the moral sphere is the concrete existence of free volition indeed within itself.
Yeah.
Okay. So just straight off the bat, we get this idea that laws, or the legal aspect, is concerned with external relations, and the moral sphere is concerned with some kind of internal relation.
Yeah. Going off what I remember from the philosophy of right, it's not like laws are indifferent to persons, right? The law recognizes you as a person, can even recognize you as an autonomous person and stuff like that. And indeed, it must kind of see you as an individual point in its system. But it doesn't do that in a way that includes what's individual or particular to you as an individual.
Right.
So in other words, you kind of have no voice in this court of law where only external right matters. It would just be like, it's all about what you do. And if you do the wrong thing, then punishment will just ensue, and that will just be the end of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
whether, what you intended with what you did doesn't matter in this sphere of law. So it's kind of brute that way, which makes it more efficient and more immediate.
And more universal, right? It's not sort of concerned with that individual's intentions. Oh, you intended to do that? Well, in that case, it's okay that you killed that person. It's it doesn't concern itself with individual aspects. It tries to take a more universal approach.
I would say it's a cruder universality that is at work, because the whole thing about morality is also universal. It's just that it's a system of universality that can incorporate and include someone's individuality, their voice, their intentions, what their feelings were, right? This kind of law just is unable to see those things because it doesn't have the concepts for it.
Right. Good. Okay. So, and then Hegel starts to talk about stuff that seems to pertain to what we spoke about last week, about how people behave. So a couple of lines down, he says, laws can compel because they apply to an individual's external being. Morality, on the contrary, is the domain of inwardness, the area of my own insights, my own self-determination, commensurate with my aims, intentions, and so forth. This internal disposition of the individual, this inwardness, cannot be commanded, cannot be made the direct object of laws. But of course, this is what happens in the ancient Chinese state. The emperor's inner insight is what is made into a direct object of laws.
Yeah. So yeah, that's right. And Hegel does talk about how it later, a bit further down, how sentiment and law kind of are forced together in the system.
Right.
Because I think that's right, that it is the emperor who does marry kind of laws and morality in the higher conceptual way. But this is taken for granted in a way, in a way, right? In fact, the same doesn't hold for anyone else. Everybody else is reliant on the emperor having this,
feeling the right things.
Yeah.
Okay, so for Hegel, then, it's important that these two domains are kept apart, that morality doesn't legislate, and that laws don't interfere in the individual's moral insights, ruminations, reflections, what they take to be valuable or not.
Well, I don't know if we want to make that sharp of a division between the two. I think they are, speaking in a modern sense, they are intertwined very often, and they sort of affect each other, and they stand in a relation. Let's put it like that.
Sure.
But we shouldn't boil them together. We shouldn't or reduce one to the other.
Well, I think what Hegel says at the end of this paragraph is very interesting. So he says, legality may not intrude into matters of sentiment. If some moral point is commanded, the laws doing so can have an excellent resonance, can be in Solomonic language, although this in turn opens the door to despotism that is all the greater in proportion to how excellent the law sounds.
Yeah, that's a great passage.
That's a great passage, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you can see you can see the kind of wisdom that Hegel is sort of picking out. You can see some kinds of laws would be very wise laws, but in being wise through commanding the individual morality of the citizens, there opens the back door for Hegel to despotism.
Yeah, and I suppose why it's despotism is because you bring in sentiment and feeling in an area that shouldn't primarily be defined by those things. That's how I was looking at it.
I think it's the other way around, though. It's the laws that are intruding on the sentiment and feeling. If some moral point is commanded, the laws doing so can have an excellent resonance. So if the laws try to legislate on the individual morality, on matters concerning respect, reverence, or affection, these are some examples that Hegel gives of the inner domain. That then, according to Hegel, opens the door to despotism. And it seems to be because he thinks that they are properly different domains, that they shouldn't intrude on each other.
So when you say the law shouldn't intrude on these moral aspects, isn't that the same as thinking that the law intruding upon these things is just actually the law harnessing them for its own devices?
Yeah,
right?
In this case it is, yeah.
So that's what I was thinking, right? That
I see, okay.
Instead of saying the law is so and so, you bring in passion and sentiment and a whole lot of other things to it to engage people, but that can also,
and you package it as a law.
So the law is kind of still there, but it has its rationality is one of sentiment and other things,
right?
Which I think is degrades the law, right?
Exactly, yeah, but also degrades the individual, I think, by forcing them to modify their morality according to some external command. But of course, as we've already said, in the Chinese state, what is ethical is made to be the law. what has value only as a sentiment is supposed to have the force of law as its object. What by nature is moral, namely what belongs to inward self-determination, is thus commanded by law. This is how Hegel sees the Chinese state as functioning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense if, let's say, you are the first one out trying to build a state, and you have all these barbarians all around you and people who are uncouth and haven't yet understood what it means to be in a state. You're gonna do, you know, the fastest, simplest, crudest way possible just to get the thing going.
Right. Yeah. So you can see how
I think this is the most primitive way you can do it.
Yeah. So just brute external measures through subjective will.
Or like marrying the subjective with the objective. So
yeah, in a very crude way.
In an immediate way, right?
Yeah.
And you provide it done in a way that's dogmatic.
Yeah.
We can also add, right?
Yeah.
You know, you should follow the laws and so on, the commandments, and we're going to pile onto that a whole bunch of tradition, custom, you know, stories, feeling, reverence, etc. Right? Things that you know maybe have nothing to do with legality, as such.
Right. Yeah. So then he sort of points back to those restrictions that we spoke about in the previous episode about families and the kinds of obligations that you have to your family members and the kinds of limitations that you can do to your family, the kind of limitations of what you can and cannot do. So fathers can sell their sons. If a son harms a brother, he gets killed. Hegel adds some other stuff which may or may not be true regarding punishing the whole family if someone does something wrong, thereby punishing the ancestors, because then the ancestors can't be revered by their descendants. And for Hegel, all this is just concerning because family relations for Hegel, from what I gather, are meant to be moral relations, not legal relations. And it shouldn't be like laws that command you how to relate to your family. It should be moral, your moral feeling about how you should relate to your family.
Yeah, although the way he puts it in the philosophy, right, is family relation is fundamentally a relation of love.
Right.
Right, which is
not illegal.
Which is also not moral, per se.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of more immediate than morality. Morality is always kind of tied up with reflection, but loving you know, your father, your mother, your daughter, your siblings, etc., right, that is not one that is fundamentally moral. It's one of love, which is something else, I think, for Hegel.
Okay.
Like more immediate and more ethical, because it belongs to the ethical life.
Okay, because Hegel here, he just sort of lumps it together with morality.
Yeah, he does lump it together with morality. Maybe
but that's good to know that in the philosophy of right, there's a more subtle distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you think back in family relations, a lot of it is pre-reflective, you can say, right? It's not about intending to do so and so. It's just being there, being with, you know, those creatures who've been around you since your birth.
Yes, the caregivers.
Yeah.
In the next paragraph, Hegel says something really interesting concerning the consequences of what we've been talking about so far. So he says, this system, so the Chinese system whereby morality is melded with legality, the system lacks the free soul, the source from which arise free, self-supporting ethical life, free science, free religion. Nothing is allowed to emerge that is the We just lost connection for a second, so I'm just going to pick up from where I believe the connection dropped. So apologies if I'm repeating myself. I think this is a very Hegelian concern, this idea that the ancient Chinese state doesn't support individual self-determination, that this is what's really at stake here. It's that a state whereby whose essence is focused on an individual, the emperor in this case, and whereby what that means that the individual's subjectivity legislates for the state, means that the individuals are unable to express themselves. Their inner world can never actualize. Whatever their interests, whatever their own little subjective wills are, will never materialize, because they will always have to be subordinated to the laws, which are the subjective laws. And it's an interesting sort of little movement there, because I guess what's happening as well is that they're interiorizing the emperor's subjectivity by having those laws compel them.
Yeah.
So it's not as if they lack subjectivity. And I would imagine in some cases, I don't want to psychologize, but I if we're sort of thinking through this logic, and to a certain degree, it's as if they're adopting that subjectivity. The emperor's subjectivity is their subjectivity.
Yes. So the farmer's subjectivity is the emperor's subjectivity, basically.
Yeah, because there's no room for their subjectivity.
No.
All there is them being compelled to behave in a certain way.
Yes, compelled,
Yeah.
Forced externally.
And that's what Hegel, I think, really thinks is problematic about this thing, if we had to sort of boil it down.
Yeah. Although there is external enforcement coming from the state in any state. Right?
Of course, yes.
So even in our own state, you have to learn to be polite, behave, and so on and so forth, right? There's a whole lot of things that are involved there. And Hegel speaks about Bildung, right, which is education, right? You need to be molded in a certain way to get the skills and so on.
Yeah.
So I don't think Hegel is against external enforcement of some sort, right?
Not at all. No.
It's just that it seems like it's very one-sided, the relationship between individuals and the state in this structure.
Yeah, I think what he doesn't like is this particular variant of externality. It's an externality that is imbued with subjectivity, with the will of the emperor.
Yeah. So as he puts it here, the government has made itself the master of morals, has seized control of inwardness, so the ideal enterprise of freedom cannot flourish.
Exactly. I think that's the concern. It's not that there are laws. No, I'm sure Hegel will be the first person to sign up.
Yeah.
To
Hegel
laws.
likes laws.
Yeah, of course, no doubt about that.
Yeah. But he doesn't want the laws to be absolute, and especially not in this way where
exactly
we don't even have laws independent. They are just completely identified with the emperor.
And I think there's a really good okay, so I think we've got a good idea of Hegel's overall grievance with the ancient Chinese state. I think maybe we should look at some more specific features that he deals with in this section. They're divided into 3 different sections. And
yeah, although I do want to bring out when he speaks about respect, dignity, one's own zone of volition, or what we might call personal space, because I found that pretty interesting, how he just interjects that very modern and sensitive point in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
And because he kind of speaks about how is it here or is it later where he goes into
it's right there. It's at the bottom of page 234, the last paragraph.
Yeah, But he later speaks about corporal punishment, which I think
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
attaches to this, what he says here. So maybe
Mm.
we'll just briefly mention it, and then we can pick it up again when he actually speaks about corporal punishment. So he says, by making this demand as such, we stand on this principle as it expresses itself chiefly in the form of respect. Respect fundamentally involves an inviolable zone that ought to exist for me. I have subjected myself to this zone by my own volition. I exist in it through my own volition. So it's interesting how, you put yourself in some kind of subjection, but you also exist in it through yourself. And that makes it self-determining. There is an element of freedom there that is made. What I am through my volition belongs to me and is inviolable. It is an infinite harm for me if someone infringes on this sphere. I have my own existence in what I have decided for myself. Respect presupposes such a being for itself and its inviolability, and it is its formal aspect. This being for itself is not respected among the Chinese. So there you have it, right? So here we get a more technical definition of what Hegel thinks is going on here. It's like, if you want to know what's missing in the ancient Chinese structure, that is being for self.
Yeah. Respect presupposes such being for self.
Yeah.
And the being for self is this volition to have this zone around you, this personal space that is inviolable. And I guess in turn means that you can't violate other people's zones, personal spaces.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is kind of the only coherent system in which being for self can work, right?
Right. Yeah.
But we will see plenty of examples where there is only one being for self, i.e. the emperor, and everybody else is like...
Yes. A very wise emperor that knows what's best for everyone. Yeah, that was remarkably modern.
Yeah, even for Hegel's own time, I think like what he touches on here is like very psychological.
Yes.
Even
it is
though
an infinite harm for me if someone infringes on the sphere.
Yeah. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, he puts a very high premium on being for self.
The highest premium there can be. All right. So you want to get into the more specifics?
Yeah, I mean, he gives us 3 specific examples of how he thinks this being for self is infringed upon, violated by the Chinese state. And I think it can be good, to see what kinds of things in objective relations Hegel thinks.
Yeah.
So we spoke.
Yeah, go on.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. So the first point to discuss is the issue of slavery, which Hegel goes through very quickly because he basically repeats himself. Although I wonder how extensive that was, slavery in ancient China, because we know ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Oh my God, there was a lot of slavery.
Oh yeah,
those societies were built on that shit. Whereas I've heard in the Han Empire, it was like 1% slavery.
Oh really? Oh, yeah. That's very little.
That is like,
well,
yeah,
1% of a lot of people. There's a lot of slaves.
It is still a lot of slaves, but in Rome, it's estimated like 20-30%.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, those are like proper slave nations. But we'll see what Hegel has to say about that when we get there. But I think it's worth thinking about maybe Hegel is taking the legality too far, right? So the penal codes might, legality might be saying one thing, but maybe that's not the reality as it played out historically.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question to ask. I mean, I guess slavery is an interesting point for Hegel to make against the Chinese, because it's an institution that will continue up until the modern era. So when Hegel will be writing about some European nations and America, they will be participants in slavery, or have been participants in slavery up until recently. So it'll be interesting to see, as you say, how he handles that.
Yeah.
And how he distinguishes it, if he does, from what he sees in ancient China.
Yeah.
But the basic point here, just to quote Hegel, is there is no acknowledgement of the primary respect a human being has, that of being a free person, this abstract inwardness. So I guess slavery, by reducing someone to property, doesn't acknowledge the inner world, the subjectivity of a human. And so
no, they're just furniture.
Exactly. To quote an excellent character from Blackadder, season 3. Why should I have my servants standing idly around when I could use them as good furniture?
Yeah, Blackadder is asking, you eat your slaves? No, I eat of them. Why should I have idlemen standing about? Yeah, he says something like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
classic.
Yeah, he embodies the spirit.
He does indeed.
Okay, so the second point is punishment, and corporal punishment as well. So this is something that you wanted to pick up on, Philip.
Yeah, but as we were already said before, the first thing Hegel says is that it's kind of attached to the whole family. So if somebody in the family commits a crime, everybody gets punished. And
Right.
that makes logical sense based on what we've looked at before, where, well, you don't really have any kind of individuality in a family except the father, because the family itself mimics kind of the societal structure. So if somebody does anything wrong, it's as if a member or a moment of the father has committed a crime, right? And therefore, the entire father and all his moments get punished for that.
Yeah. So, and then again, the problem here for Hegel is, again, there is no idea of individual moral autonomy, right? Blame is just lumped into the whole family. It's not that that person did something wrong and therefore they should be punished. So I think that's sort of the big misgiving of the system, that it doesn't recognize individual moral autonomy.
Yeah. But then he goes on to talk about how, corporal punishment can in one sense be considered something insignificant, something like, you just got a slap on your wrist, whatever, go on.
Yeah.
But then he brings out that it's, in another sense, the most humiliating. And the reason he gives is that a human being so afflicted is supposed to be coerced with regard to his inner being.
Yeah, this was fascinating.
Yeah, this is really super interesting. So what you're doing with corporal punishment is you're trying to teach something to somebody, but you're doing it by enacting it externally. You're doing it through their most natural and animal-like being. And that is supposed to teach the more elevated part of you, your mind. So instead of going to the mind directly and telling it and giving it reasons, right, which would be a better way. No, you just smack them until they get it.
And that's what's humiliating about it. The humiliation is having your inner world degraded to this more animalistic, external way of communication.
Yeah, I think we could even put it stronger. It's like corporal punishment doesn't even give a shit about your inner being. You just make sure you do what's expected of you to do in your external being, and then you can have whatever fancies you like in the inner being. We don't care, as long as you do what's expected of you in the externals. So I think it's even worse than what Hegel puts it out here.
Yeah.
So it is coercing the inner being, but it's also not recognizing it.
So punishment that is not corporal acknowledges the educated person as a moral inward being, as the kind who acknowledges the law as what is supreme. So as you said, yeah, it doesn't recognize you as a person, as an educated person, as someone who can respond to reasons. I have to say, I was kind of surprised to see this from Hegel.
Yeah.
Corporal punishment would have been all the rage in 1820s. Germany. I would imagine it was the most fashionable way to discipline your children. I can imagine Hegel disciplining little Carl by, hitting him on the head with his copy of the Science of Logic. 9.
Exactly.
So this is interesting to see this this explanation against corporal punishment from Hegel.
So he ends that section. So a mandarin who acknowledges the law and holds them in honor is degraded by corporal punishment, since it robs him of his moral standing.
So again, what's interesting about this is also the interplay between external measures and the internal moral world of the individuals. Hegel is sort of honing in on this relation in this through the theme of corporal punishment. It's the robbing of your inner world by something external to you. The same thing that's happening with the laws. They're robbing you of your inner world by their external application of the emperor's will. So I think it's, Hegel is being very consistent with the kind of concern that he has, and in the way he's cashing out the conceptual structures at play here.
Yeah.
It's that very specific dynamic between external laws and internal morality.
But I wonder if we can take it even further and say that not only is the one who's punished who's degraded, but also the punisher. Right?
I'm sure,
because the ones dishing out the punishment are presumably the ones who are, in power, in charge, the officials, right? The ones who are supposedly educated. And yet they stoop down to these means to deal with others.
Well, yeah, I mean, different criteria, right? I mean, I guess, in China, what it is to be educated for us would for them be the executor of the law, in whatever sense.
Yeah, but when they were taking their exams, people weren't bashing their heads in. They studied, right? They had teachers who lectured them, maybe even a little bit of discussion. Who knows?
Yeah. But maybe that's a good point, though. Maybe in their studies, they also don't have there's also no room for the internal world to create something of its own. Maybe it's just rote learning. It's just facts and just regurgitating it.
Okay, so even in the learning process, there would be kind of a maximal externality involved.
Possibly, yeah.
Could be. And in that case, the whole system would be consistent with itself.
Yeah.
Apart from that one point where it relies on the one individual who supposedly holds it all together.
The main man.
The main man. Top lad.
And then he sort of concludes this section with a remark about how power is sort of distributed throughout the administration.
Yeah.
And so I guess Hegel is sort of cashing out the implications of the Chinese administrative structure. He realized that the emperor, even though the emperor is the sort of the essence of the laws, he can't personally legislate in every case. And so
Yeah, or
that's
execute or judge, and yeah.
exactly. So it sort of branches down to the mandarins in sort of lower down levels, and then it's their morality that is their morality that is being sort of that is channeling the morality of the emperor, that is legislating. And and Hegel says that as soon as the oversight is relaxed, as soon as the oversight of the emperor is relaxed, which you can imagine it must be difficult, oppression and arbitrariness increase greatly, because then you just have the morality of the mandarin. You don't have the mandarin channeling the morality of the emperor.
Yeah, but there's no way out of this, right? The emperor has to delegate, has to give authority.
He does have to, yeah.
Otherwise, none of this would work, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny why people were thinking in this way, that really the source of authority has to be this one dude.
It's very simple, though, isn't it? It's very immediate. It's like,
again,
why complicate it? Why have a parliament of 600 rowdy individuals? Just one guy.
Order! Order!
Yeah. I mean, the emperor would take one look at this chaos and think, it's ridiculous.
You what?
You what, mate?
Yeah. And certainly when things, you can imagine when things are starting, people are forming societies, it becomes pretty apparent what is most effective. If you have groups fighting with one another, the ones who is most immediately organized through the simplest and quickest means is the ones who's going to win out against the others.
Yeah, but also we're slightly straying now into history, and
yes,
right. The Hegel's point is not that this is how the first state was; it's that of the states that have existed and expressed themselves, this shape is the most immediate shape in world history. It might have come later, temporally, historically, right? So what we're concerned with sort of is logical priority.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
But it looks like historical priority. I wonder what a historian would think about that. Actually, I wonder what the most up-to-date history would say about this kind of social political organization. It'd be interesting to know, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe just one last thing on this. Hegel is also concerned about the citizens who have to deal with this moral legislation, and in particular with regard to when mandarins sort of exercise their own discretion and oppression and arbitrariness enter the scene. Hegel says that citizens have no recourse against the mandarins because they have no inherent moral consciousness of their own. Right. So this lack of being for self on the part of the citizens is also an inability to defend your rights,
right?
To actually demand to be treated with respect.
Yeah,
you are entirely at the mercy of whoever is currently your superior.
Yeah,
and again, I think it's very interesting that Hegel sees this as Hegel's not just looking at the top down and seeing how power will fail to govern well. He's also looking from the bottom up and seeing how the citizens, the individuals, have no ability to redress any worries.
Yeah, then that's a great point. They are kind of mute, right?
Yeah, completely.
They have no agency of their own. And the only possible recourse I can see they could take is they appeal to laws or, whatever that the Mandarin might have not followed, and so on, or complaints to another Mandarin or whatnot. But they have everything stacked against them.
Yeah.
They haven't studied the laws, right? The Mandarins can recite a whole bunch of other reasons, whatever. Plus, there's probably very strong, collegiality between the Mandarins, right?
They're best mates. They play golf on the weekends.
Yeah. So it's imagine this very hard to do, almost if not impossible.
Right.
But
So
then,
you can see how the only recourse would be like a riot or rebellion. So again, externality is met with externality.
Exactly. Full, like there is no sort of measured approach. There would just be boom externality, as you say, and that is what happened in history multiple times.
Yeah.
You had the Yellow Turban Rebellion, which lasted for like 20 years. 20 years they went going.
That's impressive.
Multiple rebellions, and that is from like the bottom, the bottom up. But then you have more sort of structured rebellions where officials who are supposedly, becoming cancerous and not doing what they're supposed to do become warlords.
Okay, I see.
That happened as well.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that's where the morality. There's not enough oversight by the emperor.
Not enough oversight, guys. We need more supervisors.
Yeah,
we need people to supervise the supervisors. Okay,
yeah.
And then supervise those supervisors who are supervising the supervisors.
It supervises all the way down.
Another interesting difference between China and Rome is that so in China it seems like it's all very hierarchical in the sense of like the people the emperor has to deal with is like a handful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He has grand ministers, and then they have people beneath them, right? But in ancient Rome, you had the people who were like governing provinces. They were picked by the emperor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the emperor kind of was in charge of picking out exactly those people. And there was like 40 or 50 of them. So you had a kind of more people involved at the top level,
mm-hmm.
And the highest levels. Whereas here you have maybe like 3 or 4.
Right.
Plus the emperor's wife, his mother, and his grandmother.
Right. Yes.
Also up there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the mother, I think, is the most important person, right?
The living mother is the
living
most
mother.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Should we move on to ethical customs then?
Yeah, we can. I mean, we're getting to the end of this because there isn't much new here.
No, there isn't. No. Yeah.
Hegel just kind of finalizes that, well, in China, the human being ethically only has an external existence, not an internal one. A Chinese person is externally moved above all by vengeance for an injury, especially one done to his father or an elder brother. Again, everything is external, right?
Yeah.
Again, I think you're right to emphasize that this is a conceptual examination of the matter, right? Maybe in history it wasn't really so like that, but how people understood themselves might have been fundamentally how sort of grounded in this.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So yeah, like you said, a lot of the same stuff. He talks a bit about, again, responsibility and blame. He says, for blame is so widely spread that in the case of death, this is actually a wonderful little anecdote about suicide. So he talks about how someone can kill themselves in order to apportion blame on someone that they think has wronged them. And then once they've killed themselves, the state will then punish the person who was the target of the suicide. And so he says, for blame is so widely spread that in the case of death, I need only have been its cause, even without willing it, in order to be executed myself. So I just need to be someone who someone thinks I've wronged, and then I'm dead. It's over. So I think that's an interesting example.
Pretty extreme. I wonder how often that really happened. You know,
I wonder that too. Yeah, I mean, it's not so different to when knights would sort of fall on their swords. I mean, Ajax falls on his sword in the Iliad out of shame.
Yeah.
To sort of punish. So it's it's also very common in Western custom.
Yeah.
The sort of killing yourself to apportion blame on someone else.
Yeah. No, it's definitely there, right? But how much it actually happened here, I suppose what we should be really looking out for is whether it makes sense with, how Hegel thinks about ancient Chinese state in its concept. And
Right.
as you were saying, if somebody doesn't have a voice, doesn't have agency, doesn't have any means to complain or whatever with their situation, this seems like a pretty good opportunity to deal with your problems.
Indeed.
That or a full-scale national rebellion.
Either or, yeah. Either you kill yourself or you incite rebellion.
Yeah.
Which I guess is another way for Hegel to state just how dire the situation is for an individual. The only way for you to have a voice, insofar as it even is a voice, is either to commit suicide. So your voice is to remove your voice, or to incite a rebellion and try to destroy the whole structure. So, I mean, this is clearly not sustainable, despite the fact that it survived for about 5,000 years, which is hugely impressive.
Yeah, so I think we're looking here at the edge cases, right? I think for most of the time, the bureaucrats were really must have been really interested and motivated by keeping people happy, and keeping people fed. A lot of the checks and balances, I think, do work. It's just that they don't work all the time, and that's the problem.
I think the point is they don't work conceptually.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That's better. That's better put. Yes.
I mean, look, we've said a lot of disparaging things about ancient China in this episode, and they're not meant to be taken historically. They're meant to be taken conceptually. We're trying to show why Hegel thinks that these things, regardless how widespread, or even if they're accurate, how widespread they were, why he thinks they show this initial state, right?
Exactly.
And I think it's this immediacy. China is the immediacy of world history. It's also this place where laws and morality are in this immediate unity as well. Everything is in this immediacy. There isn't any development yet.
Yeah.
And that is why Hegel, and that's what Hegel thinks the first stage of world history looks like. So maybe you don't think it's China. Well, okay, then you got to go out and find which state it is. Which state is expressing these modes of being that Hegel thinks are exemplary of the first stage of world history.
Yeah, and as I agree with you, it's like we're not looking at the actual history, but we're looking at the conceptual blueprint, as it were, right? And that ancient China embodied to a large extent. Now, how much it embodied what Hegel is talking about here, that's a different question, I think.
Yeah.
But we're interested in this blueprint, and we're finding that it's actually ultimately incoherent with regards to itself, because the whole thing works by everybody sort of negating their being for self, except one person, and everybody else's rest their being for self takes that one person's being for self for granted, right? Which is kind of like the core issue of the whole system here.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
I think what you mentioned just now made me think of, as you were talking about why Hegel starts here and so forth. What Hegel doesn't do, interestingly, he doesn't think of a kind of speculative scenario where human beings were happy or everything was fine. Like, a kind of Rousseauian state of nature, right?
Yeah.
Hegel for world history is not like, that's not world history. That's just fantasy.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
So here he starts from an actual place of recorded history, right? And tries to get the rationality that is latent there.
Yeah.
But he doesn't go and kind of go step further down and imagines a certain rationality before that, because then I think that would just be too speculative in a bad sense.
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I think you're absolutely right to point this out. So yeah, so even though we are trying to find just a conceptual sort of blueprint of what's going on, you're absolutely right to point out that it matters whether there is a historical case like this.
Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely must be one.
Yeah, there has to be one. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to think it, because world history is the development of all these stages.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That development had an actual beginning.
100%. Yeah.
And that is where we start. That is where we start from. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So Hegel, no, yeah, exactly. Hegel, and I think we talked about this in one of the first episodes, like maybe episode 3 or 4, where
Yeah.
Hegel critiques this Rousseauan idea of a state of nature.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hegel is not just imagining how great or it could have been, or what we've lost, but he's sort of looking at what there is and trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, but instead of you can think of not necessarily a happy scenario or even an unhappy scenario, but just something more speculative, right?
Yeah.
Let
sure.
us just think of an even purer immediacy than the one that is exemplified here in ancient China.
Yeah.
Hegel could kind of conceivably do that logically, but he doesn't.
No.
Because maybe there couldn't be any life there. Right, any real sort of societal life, a state that comes together there.
Absolutely, I think that's definitely right. That has to be implicit in this idea. There's a sort of necessity in the fact that it has happened.
Yeah, there is an actual element in it, indeed.
Yeah.
And to round things up, he has to end with really.
So we're going to say this. We're going to go down this. Excellent. Okay, good.
Well, I'm just going to say I thought it was just like a bit silly.
Yeah.
By Hegel.
Please, I want you to be the one that says it.
Well, he says just by the by, in addition, the Chinese are extremely cunning, thievish, and deceitful, like the Indians. They are especially deceitful towards the Europeans because the Chinese lack inner integrity.
But it's not their fault. The emperor doesn't let them have inner integrity because, it's all externality.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. Well defended, Ahilleas. I defer to you.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah.
I mean, no, actually, you're right. But like, Hegel shouldn't be making this remark in such a way because it seems like that is the actual logical outcome of it, right? Because they don't have an internal existence.
Yeah.
So Hegel can't really complain. If anything, the being extremely cunning, thievish, and deceitful is actually showing that they do have some sense of internal existence. And that seems to disprove what he was saying before in his account. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So to my mind, it does seem to exactly suggest that they do have an internal existence. It's just not one that's apparent from the outside. Unless
the emperor is cunning, thievish, and deceitful.
I'll guess, of course, that can also be the case. Yes.
The apple never falls far from the tree, Philip. Excellent.
Yeah.
I thought that was an excellent discussion. I really enjoyed this section. I thought this is such a meaty, conceptually rich section that Hegel has finally given us.
Yeah.
In the China sections of the lectures.
Yeah. Everything except the last paragraph, which is
everything except the last paragraph. Yeah. And the next sections, I mean, we're talking, next week we're going to be looking at the sciences. We've got art. We've got religion. It's just, I think it's going to be fantastic going forward.
Yes, we definitely need to get a sense of the kind of religious thinking that was involved in China, especially now that we know that the law and morality are tightly connected. Well, then I'm guessing religion also is tightly bound up with that.
Right, because science, art, and religion are meant to be the expressions of subjective spirit, and that's all bound up with legality. So,
ain't nobody got time for that here.
How's that going to develop? Yeah, indeed.
We will see.
Yeah.
Lastly, I just want to say that I'm expecting Hegel to say something about the mandate of heaven, but if not, we're just going to have to fill in for him.
Oh, you really got a straw up your ass with this one, don't you?
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
And it is kind of giving actually something that seems to response to your earlier question about the peasants and so on, the people who weren't mandarins, what kind of defenses they had. Well, they could appeal to the mandate of heaven to say that, well, if things were not going well, then this emperor is clearly not selected by heaven.
Right.
And so they are free to rebel. They have a right to rebel.
Very nice.
Yeah. So this, there's a bigger metaphysical law here that might kind of go above and beyond the one that is instantiated by the bureaucracy. But we'll have to see.
I hope that's what happens.
Yes, it's like we're watching a soap opera. Like, we don't know what's gonna happen.
I hope the peasants get their revenge.
Well, you hope the peasants' revenge is justified, Ahilleas. That's what.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. In line with the law, obviously.
Revenge they will do anyway. All right, people. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.